Hi there, and welcome to this week's lesson. So this is probably about my third attempt at filming this, so hopefully third time lucky. We are pushing on with our landscape theme, and we're looking at a really interesting topic this week, which is understanding a bit more about the relationship between tone and colour, and looking at some examples about how this theory applies to some different periods of art history. Now, I would say that having done a bit of investigation into this, I was sort of familiar with some of these ideas before, but in preparing the video for you, I had a few insights which has already fed into one of my paintings that I've been working on. So I think, yeah, I think there's some good stuff here. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. So my plan is we're going to go over to Photoshop and I'm going to just talk you through some of the theory, and then I'll pick out a few of these examples and talk you through those as well to illustrate some of the points. And then I can go over and make a suggestion for what you might have a go at this week. Okay, so let's go and have a look at Photoshop and see what we've got. Okay, so we're starting off with a picture of the colour wheel, and down here we have a tonal scale or a value scale. As you can see, it goes between 1 and 8, and this is quite useful for painters because if I ask people to mix, say, between, say, burnt umber and white degrees of tone, 8's probably quite a good one you can go for, because you still have to be quite subtle in mixing these values. Okay. Now, what happens with painting is when we start, we tend to like to use white, and we quite like to use black. So we like to use the whole range of tones available to us. And that can give us some problems. And then if we look at this is our colour wheel, and this represents colours at their brightest. So there's an interesting idea, which is colour exists on a sort of spectrum between bright and grey. So bright is when it's at its purest state, okay, which would be something like this red. Now, if I want that colour to, in fact, this goes even brighter to this red, okay. When I want, if I lighten red, if I take it towards white, okay, in this direction, it becomes pink, but hopefully you can see it's also becoming grayer. At the same time, if I make it darker towards black, okay, same thing, is it becomes a grayer colour. So one of the points to be aware with this colour theory is at white and black are basically non-colours. So when you incorporate a tonal scale that includes pure white and pure black, you're emphasising tone over colour, okay? And as we'll see, that creates different effects. If we have a look at this colour wheel, if I show it to you in black and white, okay, so now this is, so we stripped all the colour out, and this is what the colours look like as tonal values, okay? So we can see we've got red up here, okay, and our lightest colour is probably yellow. So yellow is light, but if we look at this colour or this tonal value, it's actually darker than 4, okay, on this spectrum. So it's actually somewhere between 4 and 5. Our darkest colours, if we go back, okay, our darkest colours are probably these blues. So that colour, that blue, okay, it's somewhere between 7. So the whole of the colour wheel exists between about 4.5 and 6.5, something like that. So if you want to use bright colours, intense colours straight from the tube, you are automatically limiting your tonal range. If you want to use tonal values that go all the way from white to black, you are going to have to start to grey your colours out, and that's going to create different effects. So let's just look at this in practice. So I've got a grey background here, and I'm going to just do a little demonstration, just using a still life. We'll do an apple, okay? So if I take a dark here, and we've got our apple, there's our shadow side, and there's a little bit there, and maybe a cast shadow, okay? Then we go a bit lighter, light on that side, so just trying to get some sort of variations there. Maybe even going like white with a highlight, okay, and maybe another little highlight back here. Okay, so that would be an example of a tonal painting. In fact, we might even go as far as using black, okay, so we might have a bit of black immediately under the apple. That would suggest a bit of reflected light. And with tonal painting, so in terms of what does this relate to in art history, so this approach of using strong light and dark is called, I'm never quite sure of the pronunciation, I think it's chiaroscuro. I'm going to have to look that up, apologies if that's wrong. Chiaroscuro. Yeah, so chiaroscuro, so that's the name of this effect. So I just looked that up, and that's this effect of creating very strong lights and darks, okay, maybe even going picking up a bit of light on the table, something like that. So when I do my still lives and I get a strong light on them, my painting probably nudges more towards this direction, okay? So that is one emphasis. Now I'm just going to write above here for you. So this is what we would call tonal emphasis. And we're going to contrast that with colour emphasis. Okay. So with colour, I'm going back to my idea of the colour wheel, okay? And as we said, we're going to just use bright colour, okay? So the trick is, how do we create our form, our sense of a shadow and light, whilst limiting ourselves to this much more narrow tonal band, okay? And this is what the Impressionists discovered. So we can do it just using colour. So I'm going to have a go here. So this time I'm going to use blue as my shadow. And this was very popular with the Impressionists, is you use blue for shadow. It's not always the case, but it often works that way. And the reason is because blue is normally the colour of the sky. So there's our shadow shape. Now I'm going to use orange for the light side. Okay, so you can see how these colours are vibrating against each other, and that's because they are complementary colours. Okay, so we can even put a bit of red there. Maybe even a bit like that. Okay, that's got slightly confused. So I'm just going to go a bit darker with my blue. Okay, but I'm still using bright colour. And then my highlight, instead of using white, I'm just going to use yellow. Okay, and we'll use a little bit of yellow. I am using this sort of quite big brush. Okay, now for the background, I can just use, let's say, purple. And red. So we don't rely on dark. And in fact, let's put a bit more. Something like that. Okay. Now on the table where we've got some light hitting, we can go back to our orange. Okay, and maybe even a touch more yellow. Okay, just so you can see this is full of colour, and it looks like it's full of light, but if I take it now and select it and go to black and white, there you can see, so it's using a much narrower tonal range than this black and white one. Okay, so even our highlights, you know, they don't look light. We're not using so these are different ways of working, and we're going to look at some Dutch landscape painting, which had more of an emphasis on tone, and then compare that with some Impressionist landscape painting, which put more of the emphasis on colour. Okay, so you can see it relies on colour, not value. And it's just useful for you as painters to just understand that you have these two options at hand. Okay, so if you understand a bit of the theory, it means that you can play around with these and get different effects. Okay, so let's go over to our Dutch landscape painting. So the paintings I'm going to show you are from the, it's like 17th century, and it's called the Golden Age of Dutch landscape painting. And it's associated with these, what we would call, these are very strong tonal paintings, in that they have more emphasis on tonal value than they do on colour. You'll notice that the colours are quite desaturated. Okay. So if I pull out some of the colours for you, you can sort of see what I mean. So we have this strong shadow in the foreground. Now, if you go for a walk in the countryside, you will rarely, it's difficult to find this. So with a lot of these Dutch landscapes, they were being a bit creative with their use of light and dark. Let's just first have a quick look at it under black and white. Okay. And this is what, when I said at the beginning how I'd learned something. One thing I'd learned is I thought that these Dutch landscape paintings, let's look at the other ones. There's this one by Meindert Hobbema. Okay. And we've also got this one, Jacob van Riesdael. So these are tonal paintings. So what I was thinking to myself is, you know, I was thinking these are all about black and white. But when I looked at this, I was really surprised, because if I take my tonal scale, okay, thinking this was all going to be just basically black and white, then what I found was if I take my if I take the cloud, which is the lightest light, that is probably, well, it's darker than 3, so it's more like 4. So in fact, the whole painting, instead of using a wide tonal range, which was sort of what I thought was going to really help demonstrate my point, it's still actually only between 4 and 8. So that was interesting in itself. Having said that, it is still a painting that puts more emphasis on tone. Look at this area here, this light area. It's still much more around 5. Okay, so, and yet this is where we're getting the sense of light. Okay, so it's not relying on white paint to create light. It's actually just it's just using quite subtle tonal variation. So let's have a quick look at the colors used. So we've got warm colors in the foreground, and this relates a bit to what we were talking about with atmospheric perspective. Darks in the foreground, okay. Then we got these warmer colors. Then we go to, you can see the greens are olivey green. If we go into these lights, then we're getting, again, these are what I would call very grey colours, desaturated colours. The red roof here isn't actually red, it's more of a grey sort of brown colour. The tree is this dark olive with a little bit of light. So again, all very desaturated. The sky, we have this quite warm grey, and then the cloud colour is what goes to there. So these are some of the main colours. That's probably an intense colour, if anything. That's as bright as it gets, I think. Now, and for those of you that did atmospheric perspective, you'll understand why that's intense, because that saturation in the foreground helps to put these other colours in the background. So if we just contrast that with there's white. So you can see it doesn't go anywhere near that, does it? So it just uses these colours. But can you see straight away how pleasing these colours? Now, I think it's when you, you know, as an impressionist, you start to use colours from all over the colour wheel. So perhaps I'll say something about this in another lesson. But having these colours being all greyed out like this and going from, this creates great colour harmony. So these colours are all sort of, none of them are clashing. We haven't got bright, strong, opposite colours here. We've just got these muted colours. And I did also really like this composition, because when we talked about composition, I talked about some of the devices. We've got a nice, it's like an S, a sort of reverse S, okay? And I thought that was just a really nice touch compositionally. So this is just great, this sort of sweep comes in, but then it's counteracted by that curve. It just helps to flow the eye through the painting. So a really nice compositional device that. If we go on to the next one, Hobbema, okay. So again, very muted palette. So we go black and white, and it's almost the same. It could be a black and white photograph. It's sort of that strong. Again, though, the sky doesn't go really quite as, it doesn't go anywhere near pure white. The trees are incredibly dark. So this is one of the things I learned looking at Constable, was that so this is the trouble is when you start painting, our eye is tricked because on the periphery of the tree there may be small touches of green. Our eye looks at this and says, oh, they're nice green trees. Okay, if I take the colours though from this tree, we're just going to get olives, you know, darks, strong darks, not really anywhere near green. In fact, it's relating it more to these colours. So it doesn't even go that green, but that's the sort of family of greens. Okay, so it's all these darks. Okay, this little house. So when people are painting, they say, oh, it's green trees, and they get these sorts of colours out. And the trouble with that is suddenly you not only have you got too much saturation, you've actually got, you're going a lot lighter than you should do. So this is where perception of colour and tone become really important. With this house, you'd think that's a sort of red pinkish house. That's the shadow colour, which again is a sort of earthy colour. And then there's our light colour. So these are still what I would call desaturated colours. Okay, the sky is really interesting here. So the sky, we would say that's a really nice blue sky. So if I pick out the blue, I've got this colour. And this colour by itself looks more like grey, I would say. When it's beside this pinky orange colour for the clouds, it looks a lot more like blue. Okay, so this is about colour relationship. So orange will make things look blue, blue makes things look orange. So you've got a subtle play of complementary colours here. The sky, its most saturated blue is probably somewhere like here, and that is as dark blue as it gets. So people very rarely perceive that subtlety of colour and are much more likely to, it's actually reading this as a grey-green, believe it or not. So even if I was painting this, I would probably end up with a colour like this, say. Massively overstating its saturation, and so that would be a problem. So there's a great lesson here in, you know, emphasizing tone over color saturation. And let's look at a last one here. This is Jacob van Riesdael, who is again very famously associated with that area. So this also was a great lesson in tonal values, because black and white. Okay, so I was just really struck again how little light value there is in this. Overall, the painting is, you know, it's much more towards the mid value. Okay, but it does, you know, it has this spotlight. So this is a great effect. Here's our center of interest, and it's just being illuminated by this spotlight. So we have light figures against a dark shadow and a dark figure against light. And it's just a really nice effect of illuminating that space, and that gives us this spotlight. So if you were there waiting with your camera, well, and your easel, waiting for these effects of nature to show themselves, you know, you'll be waiting a long time. They do exist though, and you'll catch them fleetingly, but so there's a bit of creative license there to make the painting. Okay, and so sometimes that's why it's slightly different from perhaps how we might think of painting, which is you set up your easel and basically just get stuck in trying to represent what's in front of you as accurately as possible. But these effects can be, you know, these are really great sort of lighting effects, so they can be incorporated deliberately. So again, desaturated, sort of just playing like warm colours in the sky against cool, but you know, really sort of still very grey colours. Something similar you can see is the use of warm colours in the foreground. So a few of these sort of earthy colours in the foreground. Then we go through to grey greens. So this one's really amazing for the desaturation of the green. And I might be wrong in this. I'm sure I heard somewhere about sort of Dutch paintings. The green, they used a green pigment which hasn't it hasn't proven to be very colour fast. So that there may have actually been more saturation in these greens than we can see here. But yeah, see, this is not even green really. It's just sort of a warm grey. These background trees, they're really great because again, we do get a slight colour fluctuation somewhere between orange and green, interestingly enough. So again, just little colour notes. But dark trees against this grey sky and the greys. So let's see how saturated this blue gets. So again, still quite grey blue. Up here, it's getting darker. And that's about as saturated as it gets. So if we were squeezing our paint out of the tube, we'd have these sorts of colours. Maybe even like cerulean blue. And you see how garish they look almost side by side, that they're almost too intense for this type of painting. So yeah, so the Dutch painting, what we can learn from this is to emphasize tone. Okay, now this, as we've looked at these, it doesn't mean you just use white and black. You actually still don't, you're using a relatively narrow tonal band. This one though, it is going probably almost to white with our spotlight here and these very dark foregrounds. So it is more of a tonal painting. Okay, so that's Dutch painting, and now let's have a look at some Impressionist painting. Okay, so here we've got, I've used some Monet paintings to try and illustrate this point because he certainly, as his work progressed, if you look at his earlier work, it probably erred more towards tonal painting. But as they were making these discoveries about how to depict light and atmosphere, then you can see some of these points that I'm talking about. Okay, so in this painting, let's have a look at this black and white. Okay, and you can see how really there's no darks here, and there's no, in fact, there's no white either. So these clouds don't really go. If I pull out a white here, okay, if I put a white bit there, you can see that really the cloud doesn't go anywhere near as light as that. So again, we can see this narrowing of the tonal range. Okay. So all of the work is being done with, well, I mean, there is tone here. You know, obviously we can see that this cloud is light, so it's not just pure colour, but like these background houses and everything like that, everything is, we're much more using colour than we are tone to depict nature. Okay, so what we can see is basically warm light hitting the trees. So this is oranges and warm pinks and these sorts of colours in the light. And then we can see some of the shadows here, blues and greens creeping in. Okay, and also you can just about see some of this great texture. You know, Monet really did put the paint on thickly. Okay, this tree is a great example, okay, of it's using sort of oranges. You know, it reads as a green tree, and yet the greens are still quite desaturated, more using the oranges we see over here, and then the shadow side is blue. Okay, so blues in the shadow, oranges in the light. And as I say, this relies on, it's not only using colour to create light and dark, but as I say, also it's using complementary colour theory, okay, which is when you put oranges beside blues, because they're complementary, they will start to glow. And you can see this here. So in the water, we have little dots of blue against that orange, and that works a treat. So it's a very different type of painting from the Dutch artists. So here we have one of his, this is when he was really getting into his colour with the haystacks here. So here we can see real strong colour saturation, okay, and it works a treat. But let's have a look at it black and white. Okay, and you can see, again, it's not a very strong tonal painting, but there is some tonal suggestions going on here. But that's definitely not carrying the painting. Again, not going to white, so the whole sky remains more of a mid value, and so even when you're doing these types of paintings, it would be tempting here where you want this intensity to stick a bit of light. Okay, maybe you go, oh, let's put a little bit of light here, and it wouldn't work. Okay, as I say, the more it goes towards white, the less color saturation you have, and that's really what he's gone for there. And there is also some nice effects. So he's created the feeling of shadow being cast, okay, and now I'm not even sure if that did show up in the black and white version, but what he's doing is he's creating these areas where we see slightly warmer colours. The yellows become warmer. In the shadows, it's all purples and greys, greens, and where he wants the light, he's using reds and oranges. So at this point, he's really got into this idea of creating the effect of light by using colour as opposed to tone, okay? And finally, we can see this one, another haystacks one. Again, these were very popular, these paintings, and they still are. A great sense of light. It feels a bit early morning. Here the colour is less saturated. You can see all these nice greens in the sky and these deeper greens. This is what I would call a high key painting because the tonal balance. Okay, this is it black and white, and again, nowhere near dark. So, here's a bit of dark. So it would look completely wrong, okay? So he's just relying on colour and with great effect, okay? And it's not even particularly saturated. I mean, this is a great example here. He's got, so the light's coming from this side, so we have light on the edge of the form, and where he wants light, he's not using white, he's just using a more saturated pink colour. And then on the shadow side, he's more relying on purples. So again, it's this balance of warm and cool, and you can see also with the cast shadows in the and the light areas, pinks, greens, warmer sort of decent almost oranges, and then in the shadow side it's these emerald greens, purples, and these sorts of things. Okay, so there's a few examples there. So I hope you found that useful. I hope I've managed to get the main point across to you, which is there are two ways to working, really, two emphasis. One is where you emphasize tone, the other is where you emphasize color. Color, you're playing a lot more with complementary colors to create this feeling of luminosity. And with black and white, you rely on strong tonal contrast to create dramatic light and dark effects. So what I would like you to do this week is I want you to try and find an image, and I want you to try and paint it using both techniques. I want you to, now depending on your reference material, you might have to use your imagination somewhat. But I want you to take one and really paint it almost monochrome using those desaturated colours that we saw the Dutch artists using. And then I want you to try and paint the same subject again in an impressionist style, where you use brighter, more intense colour. You don't have to go nuts though, but keeping the tonal scale much narrower, okay? Not going up to white and not going down to black. And if you're not sure where to start, look at your subject, break it down into light and dark. The general rule the Impressionists use is that the darks, the shadows tend to go cooler, greens, blues, purples, and the lights will go oranger with yellows, oranges, pinks, those sorts of things. So hopefully you should find it quite good fun. And then you can send me those in. I'll try and do 2 demonstration paintings as well to illustrate the point. It's quite interesting to see how far you can sort of explore these and push these different effects. So I think it's rich territory. And of course, you can only do that if you get the time to do the 2. You might not spend as long on one as you do the other. And try and think about what style you like. You know, which approach do you prefer? In my painting, I probably nudge more towards the tonal approach than colour. But you know, people love the Impressionists, and they love that bright colour effect. So so they both have their merits. Anyway, so send me those in on Thursday, and we'll have a feedback session. And I say I'll also do a demo on Wednesday. Anyway, any questions, you can put them in the comments below. And if you want to take part this week, I've got 4 more weeks left, and then I'll be taking a break in August. I'll put the details below. You can subscribe and help support me, and you can also send your work in at the end of each week and get some feedback. Okay, so I'll be doing that on Friday. Anyway, thanks a lot, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers, bye.